Oh, I don't want to carry the New England hat, but if I can wear the hat of like, hey, if we're in a different place and Marty's like done his research on either restaurants or Airbnbs, like I will fully 100% carry that. I will carry that cross.
We can just group it to hospitality.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, places to stay, places to eat, good coffee. And I'm not an expert. I'm not an expert in any of those three places, but I think I know just what were we talking about earlier today? Where like, just enough to be dangerous. What was that line? Who wrote that line that we were talking about? Mac. Dangerous confidence. Such a cool fucking line. Like,
Mindful quiet.
yeah, like there was, and so jumping back into it here, that was one of my favorite things about today is just some of the great one-liners in all the work that we were looking at. There was some absolute just stunners in there that from everything that we read. It was just there was those lines that you highlighted and you were like, yes, like give me that tattoo or put that on a t-shirt or send that fucking postcard to my grandma. The world needs to see that line. And if they get to the rest of the story, great. But if not, fuck man, that line fucks.
I mean, you said about one of Keith's poems that every man should read it, every decade. And,
once a decade, yeah.
And I mean, that is quite a testament. But yeah, I think each author had segments in their writing that were so resonant with the readers, and that I just think that's part of what great writing can accomplish is that it can invite you in. And everybody had some moments today, whether it was dangerous confidence or it was driving around in a cul-de-sac,
The stacking bodies in a freezer,
the sausages.
Oh man,
Yeah.
Everybody had that moment where we were like, thank you for welcoming me into this piece of writing. And
I think it's a good time to give the brains behind Dead Reckoning a big nod for selecting the pieces they selected.
Yeah.
Because if two pieces were too similar, then those lines might have gotten lost.
yeah.
And the fact that there were three totally different pieces
Yeah.
at least it helped me focus on that one, not get confused. And then the next author, it was totally fresh, and I felt fresh going into it.
Yeah. It's also one of the reasons why we put the poetry in the middle.
Yeah, it clearly wasn't a random selection. Whoever you, Tyler, Keith, whoever selected it, did a perfect job doing that.
coming back to drafts, I think we were talking about, you said you need a pretty good draft I think you do need a pretty good draft to make this specific weekend productive.
Mm-hmm.
I think that sometimes you should be okay with a shitty first draft. And so, so if the fact that Mac came in with a first draft of that quality is pretty rare. And that if I am holding myself to the Mac standard on my first draft of my first short story, I probably will never write it. And so I am grateful that I've kind of been taught, and for my writing process, is be okay with the shitty first draft and then revise. We were fortunate that we had, Keith had been working some of those poems for a very long time. And so, I think that to maximize a weekend like we just experienced, you had to have drafts that were at least, kind of a pretty solid foundation, a pretty solid place to.
I'm a believer that if you're going to ask somebody to take the time
Mm-hmm.
to give you feedback on something, that you owe it to them to put your best foot forward up to the point of, hey, I took this as far as I could get it with, whatever time I had to work with or, whatever. And now I need that outside help. But yeah, I don't think it, come together for a workshop. I don't think that's the place for wrote this on the plane and,
Right.
fucking here it is, guys,
If you're going to ask a reader for their full,
Mhm.
complete attention, for 8, 9, 10, 15 pages, you owe it to them to make sure you're going to hold their attention for that whole time. And a lot of times emerging authors or emerging writers are not yet capable of doing that. And so it would be unwise to assume that your first draft of anything is going to be able to do that, which I'm sure you can probably speak a little bit to what you see working with, with magazines that are pushing out. These are a lot of times students. And so do you see kind of a spread there between, is it obvious to you who's done the work and who has not yet done the work? Yeah.
And on a couple of different levels. There's the actual, like just having read the instructions of what we're looking for. When you're sending out to literary magazines, if you're trying to get published, pay attention to what they're publishing. If you're writing Twilight fan fiction, you don't go for a magazine that you know is never going to publish something like that. So there's that, just read the instructions, read an issue before you send to it. In workshopping environments, I try not to have hard and fast rules, because somebody will always come up and be like, well, what if? And they'll have like a good, all right, well, that's a good exception. But a lot of times I try and make sure a piece is complete. And that was the other thing I liked about everything we did. There was nothing like, there was no asterisks like, and then this is going to happen here, but I haven't written yet, or open-ended, or, not really a beginning. They had beginning, middle, and end, and they were complete as they could be in that moment. Because I think you could bring something in, but it's also, as a writer, the more open-ended you leave it, the more you're inviting other people to come into your space and now direct the story in a very prescriptive way, in a way that's probably not very beneficial, because now you've basically given the reins over to somebody else, and it could end up spinning out into the stratosphere in a direction you don't ever intend on taking it. So that's that like artistic vision that you have to a degree, to just be like, I don't know how I'm going to get it there, but this is what I want to see it be. And the more complete you can make that, the more likely you're pushing everybody to look at the direction you want to look at it.
Yeah.
So, and I think it comes in, not coming in with an element of humility, but respect to the reader. And then to your point, if you respect my time, like, you won't just hand me a pile of steaming shit, right? And so, but also
not intentionally.
Sure.
Right. Yes.
And then, but what we've discussed several times throughout the weekend is some sense of entitlement, because I'm a veteran writer, or this is my personal truth. And it's like, okay, but it's not very good and it needs some work. And so that's not a personal attack on you, right? And so I think that the element of humility that everyone kind of came in, but also we've worked hard on, Keith's worked hard, Mike's worked hard, Max worked hard on these. So it wasn't like, hey, I'm just read a bunch of this stuff, I haven't really thought about it too much, and now you do the work, right? Everybody here put in the work, but didn't feel entitled that they didn't have this hubris, and so I think that was also it was just all the right elements, I think, were in place.
Well, and again, to the hat tip to Keith and Tyler for, which I know jury's out on Tyler, but but Keith and Tyler, they did kind of great job as casting directors for this weekend of, what a cool group of people that, to come together. And I know I certainly feel super privileged to have been able to sit down at a table with people that I would trust to give feedback on and value that feedback. And I was as concerned, I'm sure for, the guys that, had their stuff read today, it was there's probably a certain amount of anxiety there, right? I had a little bit of anxiety. I was like, man, is my fucking feedback worth a shit? Because I respect so much of everybody that I respect everybody that was sitting at that table so much. It's like, man, I hope I'm not falling short on my feedback for them, So it's just a really cool collection of people that we have together for this.
Yeah, all credit to the Dead Reckoning guys for bringing this specific group together.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely nerve-wracking having my first stab at fiction read in front of my boss's boss, and then
Should we talk about that for a second? So Mac,
let's give some context.
First time meeting him, doesn't even know what I look like. Yeah, you're tear this apart on camera. Great.
So Mac
And then
is
let us post it publicly.
yeah. So Mac is so it's what is today? March 21st. Oh yeah, fucking Recon Day or whatever. It's like all of March is like every
Hell
MOS
yeah.
in the Marine Corps. This is like the third day this month where I see the
Semper
Marines
Fi,
on
rah.
social media being like, "Oh, it's March 11th. Oh, it's March 17th.
Yeah,
it's March
hell yeah.
21st. It's
Hell yeah.
fucking gee,
It should
Christmas."
only be fucking March.
Yeah, and then there's like a couple of guys that they like claim all 3 days because they've had a very prestigious career in the Marine Corps.
Sound like some
It's like,
badasses
Jesus,
to
dude,
me.
like, come on, leave some room for fucking St. Pat, okay? So Mac is so it's like it's like March 21st. Mac starts with Coffee or Die as a staff writer on April 1st, and this is the first time that Mac and I have met in person, and it is kind of an interesting dynamic of like, hey, we're now this is not the first time I've read Mac's work before. He's published with us a couple times via freelance and everything like that. There's a reason he's getting hired, right? Like he's a fucking good writer. We all saw that today. So it kind of interesting being able to sit down at a table with a new person on my team, and be able to dive in with other people into some of his work. It's really cool, and you be able to. I'd like to think that you're evaluating me a little bit too.
Yeah, a little bit.
You should.
Like
be.
we said, I made some notes for HR for later.
Yeah. HR lady, it doesn't count. He's not officially on the payroll yet. April 1st. Let the record reflect it is March 21st today. HR lady.
And the most damning statements came March 20th, so they're definitely null and void.
I don't know. It was all, a blur to me. I've made multiple references that are not appropriate for any sort of adult setting, so I haven't matured. There's that theory out there that nobody really matures past like age 16. They just have more there's just more life experience coloring, but like you're essentially the same person you were at 16.
I freaking hope not.
I think that really applies to me. I don't I really feel like maybe there's certain things I'm better at now, but I'm like essentially the same person that I was at 16.
Actually, you're not wrong.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I didn't know you at 16, but
Nothing to write home about. You didn't miss anything.
I don't know. Do you guys feel like you've progressed past 16?
I fucking hope so. 16-year-old me
Scary
was.
thought.
At its core, like, yes, I've advanced. We've all advanced past 16, but like my essence was the essential. Some of those, I think I could see some of that. That core is there. Sure.
I don't think I'm a fundamentally different person though than I was at 16. There's a lot of things that are different about me, but fundamentally, I don't think I'm a different person.
Were you writing at 16, Marty?
So there was like some writing on the wall, so to speak, when I look back at, and especially recently, we moved out here to New England, and so you go through boxes and things like that as you're packing up, and found a lot of my old things from school, and I don't. Until I got out of the Army, it was like 2 years after I got out of the Army where I realized like, oh, this is my passion. This is where I want to go. But man, the signs were all there. It's really there's like no excuse really for me not realizing this sooner. I look at some of the stuff that I was doing. One, how much I read growing up. But two, I was writing stuff. We did this trip one summer we were kayaking, 100 or so miles of the Missouri River, 150 so miles of the Missouri River at a time every summer. And I was writing this like basically historical fiction of like reimagining the trip through the eyes of Lewis and Clark, right? And I was writing this thing, and it's nothing, that I would go back and be like, wow, I really, watch out for Marty Skovland, back then. Not necessarily, but it's just like, that's where my head was. Nobody told me to do that. I was doing a lot of, I wrote a couple of sermons for church and things like that. And I definitely enjoyed writing the papers in history class and social studies in English. And, so there's like a lot of things that were just like, man, how did I not see this coming? It's one of my bigger regrets that, man, I spent all this time, especially in the military, on deployments where you have a significant amount of downtime that you deal with. Like, that's right. Like one of the dirty secrets of war is you sit around a fucking lot and do nothing, And I watched a lot of TV shows and a lot of movies, and stuff like that. It's just like, man, I could have knocked out like a book of deployment, like I could have knocked out a screenplay deployment. I could have had such a portfolio, such a resume coming out of the military if I had known. And I really envy these guys and gals who knew going into the military, knew from a young age, like, hey, I want to be a writer. Hey, this is what I want to do. And they kind of always, even if they were doing other things, always knew and were taking advantage of the opportunities to write along the way and everything. And to a certain degree, because of when I started, it's felt ever since I've got started on this, like I'm playing catch up with the people who've known from the get-go, or people who never went into the military, went to college, got their degree, and then immediately started interning at a magazine or whatever. It's like I feel like I'm playing catch up.
Yeah, I mean, think of E.B. Sledge writing in the Bibles of his margins of his Bible. Think about Marlantis heading into, Marlantis, I'm sure, was writing, throughout. Think of O'Brien. Who's the other Mortarman from Kilo 35? He's the guy with the shitty attitude. Lackey. Like, I mean, these guys. These
you
guys
fucking hate Lecky. I don't know why he writes beautifully. Just because he wasn't a fucking lieutenant.
Oh, wow. I literally love E.B. Sledge, who was also not a lieutenant. Lackey was a great writer, and I like Lackey, but he's kind of pissy. He's kind of like...
He just refused to read Strong Man Armed, which is the best account of the Pacific because of his bad attitude. Anyways,
so
continue.
We'll revisit. To Marty's point, a lot of these guys were writing throughout their deployments and went in knowing they were writers, thinking about writing. And it's like, oh, you wrote a fantastic war novel. Like, yeah, I think, I on my deployment, I did write, but I was writing just like very much journal entry, like patrolled this sector today, took contact from the Northeast. And it was not like, I never envisioned myself as a writer. And then I did plug into my faith a lot during my deployments because I was very close to death throughout most of my 2 deployments. And so I'd find myself reading Psalms, looking at what David wrote, and then like saying, where I felt, what I felt David was saying and what I kind of felt at the time. But never in anticipation that like writing might be a thing for me at some point.
I feel like you basically said the same thing, and it feels so unique, but I've heard that so many times that now I just assume it. And it's the same thing with me. Like when I told my wife and my mom, like, I'm going to, really try everything I can to make writing be what I can do for work. They were like, well, yeah, you've been writing since you were a little kid. And I'm like, what? No, yeah, you used to just write stories with your friends. Like, that's what you guys would do. And I was like, oh, I guess that's not normal. And I'm like, yeah, you kept a journal every deployment. Did anyone else? Like, well, I guess not. They're like, yeah, no shit. You want to write. You've always been writing. And that's now, like, for me, I was like, holy shit, how did I not see? And I've heard that conversation from so many people say, oh, I've been writing my whole life. I just didn't realize it. Because I never considered growing up like that I could make that a reality as far as employment goes. So it was just like, oh, I love to write, so I will keep writing. But okay, what am I going to do to provide and make money? And it seems like when people finally can find a way to make that happen, then they're like, oh shit, it's been right in front of me this whole time. I just didn't know.
I mean, it's absolutely insane that everybody else can see this thing about you and you don't realize it's going on, and just it makes you wonder. For me, it's like, man, what am I not seeing right now that 10 years from now somebody's going to be like, hey, are you kidding me? But also I think there's a big part of it, I think, especially when you're a young kid growing up or a young adult, the idea of being a professional writer. I think unless you know somebody that had done that, which for me I did not. I later found out that I actually had I believe he's a great uncle who was a journalist, and I have his camera now. He wrote for the paper at the time in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. And I didn't know that when I was growing up, though. Nor did I know him, period. Like, he was long gone before I came around. And but I think it's one of those things that's similar to a lot of people for, like, acting or, so a lot of these other creative fields, right? Creative fields feel so out of touch because there's not this defined pathway to getting that job, right? It's a very nebulous thing where you're like, everybody's path to being a professional creative in any genre, right, is very unique to that person. Everybody, it's like who thing, or I did this, or I did that, or I zigged instead of zagged, and now I'm here. Like me and Max, the way we've come into contact with each other was very much by chance. I feel like, and
but I think that's also a part of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that like Mac is, he got the job at Coffee or Die because he was in alignment to receive it, because he had already done all of the work.
Put himself in a position to be in a 100%. But I think it's just like when you think about it as a kid, though, and not knowing where you're going to go, or a young adult, it just seems like such a fantastical, like, oh, grow up, kid, go,
right,
go do something that's a little bit more realistic. Whereas writing, it's even a couple years ago, like, you don't think that some of the things, I don't know. It seems there's days even right now where like I'm like, man, I feel like things are going too good for me as far as like being a writer. Like, aren't writers supposed to be like,
sad and
starving
depressed?
artists.
Like,
well, I feel like particularly for me right now, we've got some really cool things going on, both for me, both personally and professionally. And it's like one of those things. And I was talking to Logan Stark, who I think you're familiar with. Yeah. So he is like one of the main brains behind everything at Black Rifle Coffee, and a big part of what that company is, and the success that it's had so far. And he and I have talked a lot about, like, success and things happening and things going well. And there's this innate, almost like fear of that, to where you think like, it's like life is like the stock market, right? Like what goes up must come down, and what goes down must come up, and we're talking about, is that unique to combat veterans? Because when it got too quiet or things got too good, it was like, okay, now's when the bad thing happens. Now's when,
it is not only a combat veteran.
Yeah.
I can guarantee it.
Yeah.
I'm sure it's different for you guys, but
no, not necessarily, but it's just
one I open every once in a while. Like,
Yeah.
this shit can't last forever.
Yeah. It's almost, it's like an interesting thing. And I think you do wonder, especially as a creative or somebody who's being creative professionally, and you're just like, man, does this last forever? And shit, man, some of the most successful writers of the 20th century, it's like they were very successful and still fucking killed themselves.
Yeah, I think part of, whether it's the artist or the combat veteran, I think it's us. We get uncomfortable when the homeostasis occurs. It's like, well, no, I know entropy, right? Like, where is the chaos? Like, that's where I'm comfortable. When I'm fighting, when shit's blowing up, when shit's like, and it's like, wait, things are pretty good. What this? And
I'm
like
suspicious.
And
yeah.
And this is TMI, but like when that happens in my life personally, I'm like, wait, everything is like aligned, and like I'm happy, and it's like, well, let me see if I can reconnect these wires to this time bomb and blow this shit right up, right? And so, like, so long as you
This is a familiar feeling to me.
guard because I for so long felt like everything I did, because I grew up in such a chaotic youth, that I always felt like my drive to do everything was to restore order to the chaos. And so when I got into combat and it was all chaos, I was like, oh, I just had like, I know this is, I've been here my whole life. It's no problem. Like, I just like, oh, we got a casualty here. We got an ambush here. We need artillery there. It's like, yep. Just going to put so, and then, and I thought that's what was my driving motivation, is to always put the order to chaos. And then when I started, when things were pretty orderly, when I hadn't had a combat deployment, I was deployed from 2010 to, my youth was like one ambush after another. I was always kind of getting punched, always. And then it was like So I didn't, and then I'm like, all right, in my young adulthood, it's like, oh, right back in it, right? It's like from 22 to 25, I'm in Afghanistan. So it's all what I've been growing up with, and it's like things start to stabilize, things are starting to be pretty good. I'm like, how am I gonna? I didn't realize this, but I was like, I gotta find a way to fuck this up. Like and so this idea that anytime things are too good, you start to kind of get uncomfortable. It's interesting. I think in your case, with the company, with the organization, with the leadership, and with what you guys bring, I think you should feel pretty good about it. Yeah.
Yeah. But then it's like you say that and then you like get T-boned on the way out of here, you know.
Well, yeah.
That's, you know, yeah, the whole sleep with one eye open thing. It's interesting.
It's not to get complacent. It's not.
Yeah.
It's not to say, hey, yeah, just go ahead and rest on your laurels. You gotta. I mean,
Yeah. You can never do that. It's like Mac, you know, coming on, like it's super exciting and everything like that. But it's like, it's that day, you know, I compare it to like the day I, you know, got my tan beret. It's like, I made it. No, you fucking didn't. Now you just got another.
Now the work actually
new
starts.
expectations and new responsibilities and new everything. It's constantly. It's this constantly evolving. Like those false hilltop, the false summits. Yeah, you know, and it's a series of that. But it's like, yeah, well, you know, you never really do truly want a summit because you don't want the trip to end. Right.
It's great too that to bring it back to writing. Like it's great. Like you finish something or you sell it or someone picks it up for publication. You're like, oh, this is amazing. Like I made it. You didn't. Like now all the actual hard work starts because that publishing house is going to give it to an editor who's going to send you back a file stack of revisions to make, you know? And there's always like the ongoing story of like the writer who becomes an author who thinks like, all I have to do is sell my first book, or all I have to do is get this, and then I've made it.
And God forbid that whatever you did becomes extremely successful, and now you're constantly trying to live up to that for everything you do. Like, God help you if you are just knock it out of the park on your first try, because you're going to be trying to live up to that for the rest of your life. You know?
The writer David Foster Wallace, his first book he published when he was still in undergrad, I think.
Yeah, it was his graduate.
Yeah,
it was like graduation, his capstone project.
Right, his thesis.
That's that thing.
And it took off, and 3 years later he was in rehab. His entire life had fallen apart, and he would always say to younger writers, I hope to God you don't have any success before the age of 35. Like, don't let that go to your head, because and I've heard a lot of other writers tell me that have mentored me and given me the time of day and spoken to me. That's just focus on living consistently, putting out good work, and focusing on each project and just doing the best in the moment, because you never know what's going to happen. Once it gets out in the world, people are going to pan it, people are going to love it, you're going to go up here, you're going to go down here. You don't have any control once it's out there.
Yeah.
So just be more consistent and try and stay in the moment, focus on what you have in front of you, and that seems to be the best attitude I've come up with so far.
Great. Awesome. So on that note, when are we going to expect final revised drafts from you two?
I don't think it should just be us. I think everyone who submitted, workshopped, and the other people in that folder, we should all agree to a deadline to resubmit. And even if it's all virtual, we can read each other's stuff.
That's great.
Even if nothing comes out of it, I personally want to read Keith's poems, your story, because they were so fucking good. But there's a lot to be done. I want to see the finished product.
Yeah.
Agreed.
This also really says something to the nature of good workshop groups, is that it doesn't end at the end of the weekend. Like you'll still continue to have those conversations. And I mean, we've been here together now for 3 days, just reading and writing and talking and eating and reading and writing and talking and eating. And a lot of times, you know, like, especially if you're not tied to like a community that fosters this, you know, if you're in another branch of writing that doesn't necessarily, you know, sometimes deadlines are more important than 4 days of reading, writing, and eating. It's one of the great things is you get to take that community forward. You know, you see it all the time too with what you do. So it's a great send off.
Mm-hmm.
Well, big thanks to Dead Reckoning Company or Collective, Dead Reckoning Collective, for providing us a venue to come together and bringing us all together on this. And
big thanks to Black Rifle Coffee
big
Collective.
thanks.
Company.
Yeah, that's I like Black Rifle Coffee Collective better, I think. No, so like, go out there, and after you're done listening to this, go get that copy of Lucky Joe that Dead Reckoning just dropped recently. Maybe buy a bag of Black Rifle Coffee, because nothing goes with a good book like a cup of hot coffee, and hopefully we can all come back together for one of these things again.
Check out Mac's
Definitely.
work in Copy or Die.
Yeah, we'll see.
Yeah.
Join the book club.
Could be about that.
There you go.
Yeah.
Come
PB
hang out with
Abate.
me on Zoom. We'll talk books,
Yeah.
talk words, bunch of word nerds.
There's writerly communities for veterans everywhere.